Alright guys, so ini dia international interview dengan soalan-soalan panas. Namun Perdana Menteri kita Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim tenang menjawab segala soalan-soalan yang diberikan. Jadi ayo kita bersama-sama untuk menonton ya video ini.
Thank you so much for joining us on CNBC. And we're coming to about 2 years since you actually took office in Malaysia, and a lot has happened. I remember that when you started out as Prime Minister of Malaysia, one of the things you said was, first and foremost, we have to tackle inflation. That's going to be one of our key economic priorities at the moment. Coming into the third year in office, what are the new economic priorities for Malaysia, given the fact that we've seen inflation come down and perhaps calm down just a little bit in the last couple of years?
لو كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بيننا وسألنا هل أطعمتم الجائع ماذا؟
Well, the focus has to be the economy, and policies have got to be adjusted. New concerns, new priorities. Digital transformation was never an issue before. So was energy transition, so semiconductor as a priority. But now these issues have got to be addressed. And I think if we could use this, like for example, semiconductors considered, Malaysia is now considered a hub for semiconductor development and investments, including the front end, because of the ecosystem that's been there. So it will certainly then propel the economy and resolve many of the issues like we have seen now, the ringgit, inflation.
Minister, I wanted to ask, it seems that investor confidence, both foreign and domestic, has really picked up for Malaysia. And that wasn't the case, say, 5-6 years ago. And I bring us back to 1MDB. Now, there were concerns that this might actually cause reputational damage to Malaysia and make it more difficult, and thus also necessitate Malaysia perhaps restore and repair its reputation. Did you have to do that in the lead up to attracting a lot of this investment back into Malaysia?
Precisely, JP, the initial few months was all about that. How do you deal with these issues? What about governance? About what they consider as endemic corruption? Based on the experience of M1MDB and the various other scandals. You have, for example, leaders in the past, once you become Minister of Finance, or Prime Minister, you become, billionaires in a matter of years. And this has to stop. But they have seen it in the last year, our very strong commitment combating corruption. Investors, both domestic and foreign, are looking at it. And when they see this sort of consistency, and some even condemn me being overzealous. But I think we have to save the country. To my mind, again, the major problem is poor governance and endemic corruption. Without that trust and that confidence, people will not invest in a big way. Unless those people who have some corrupt arrangements with you, they will still continue. But that has to stop, and fortunately it has stopped. Although we are still carrying on this mission, the crusade against corruption has got to be full force.
Let's go back to the topic of inflation, because it seems based on the August print, 1.9%, it has come to heel. But has inflation really been tamed in Malaysia? Because when they talk to some ordinary Malaysians, they still bemoan the fact that the cost of living, either housing or food, still is higher than it was, say, 2 years ago. And there is a feeling that conditions are still tight for many households. Do you feel that inflation has been tamed, or can more be done actually?
I come from the ground. Every Friday before Friday prayers, I will sit and have lunch with the common stalls, not the 5-star hotels. And they give me the input. Yes, it's 2%, it's very low. Look at price of sugar, edible oil, petrol, flour, all are cheap, much cheaper in Malaysia as compared to all our neighboring countries. But to those affected, particularly the lower income group, they do feel. That's why in the next budget, I have to address this issue. And the reason is the level of income has not increased with the for example, increase in productivity or investments. And we have to address the issue. What I've done with the civil service, for example, 1.4 million of them, is to raise the salary, which has been largely ignored the last 12 years. You must take care of your own workers. Then you can then persuade or moral suasion for the private sector conglomerate to say, look, you register what, 1 billion profit, 2 billion, 4 billion? You can't pay your workers in that manner. So I think there should be some pressure to increase the level of income, because in terms of price, although there is a concern, it's because of low income or low salary or wages. Now, if you increase, then they can understand that ours is much cheaper than our neighbors, not less cheaper, much cheaper.
And a lot of this really feeds into that age-old question that faces Malaysia and some other countries, such as the middle income trap. Do you think that with all the investments coming to Malaysia, that perhaps getting out of that middle income trap is actually achievable for Malaysia, and when that might happen?
You see, the trap is partly because of obsolete policies. So we resolve through that proper policy that would have to be adjusted, like our focus on training in universities, the disciplines being introduced, the quality of education and public health. I think those issues all taken all together, and the type of investments. For example, data center is a popular thing in Malaysia. They rush in by the billions because of cheap energy and water. But we say, all right, fair. But we will not approve until you have the high end of AI. The NVIDIA, for example, coming with data center with a very sophisticated program for AI. Then we say it can be done. Now, if that is achieved, when it's achieved, and I believe it's achievable, then you actually move beyond the middle income nation, what do we call as a middle income trap.
Right. But to attract a lot of these high-end processes in these value chains, whether it be data centers, semiconductors, there is still a skills gap that Malaysia might need to address. And to be fair, your administration has outlined an ambitious goal of 60,000 engineers in the next 5 years. How critical is it going to be for Malaysia to get that number right, or even earlier than 5 years?
Well, it's carrot and stick. But what I mean is, the universities, the colleges, the polytechnics, the TVETs, all have to be geared up and change. Now, how do you then ensure that the process is accelerated? By getting these formal education institutions to work with the private sector. Because I don't think an educational department can train as well as Infineon training for their own requirements. Whether we can achieve 60,000, I do concede that I have my doubts too, but we are pushing ahead through a variety of initiatives. But meanwhile, we have to be more flexible to bring in, even if we need so, engineers from neighboring countries.
One thing that you've mentioned in the last budget is that Malaysia needs to reform its subsidies program, and you've actually tried to shift away slowly but surely towards more targeted subsidies. Can we expect more of that?
First in Malaysia.
In the upcoming budget, and what other subsidy reforms might you be looking to introduce if that is the case?
Well, people have ignored the fact that in the last 1.5 years, quite a number of things have been done. Electricity subsidy, because otherwise, in the past, all been subsidized. Now, we've been to be more creative. I don't want to introduce the so-called reforms is palatable to the investors and lose the government. I mean, you have to be both a statesman and a politician. And therefore, you have targeted subsidy, electricity, for example, the top 20% or T20, and foreigners have to pay. Otherwise, how do you expect government to subsidize foreigners? We've got 4 million people in Malaysia in the top 20 who actually consume far more than an average person, probably 10 times more. And through that initiative, early last year, we managed to save 4.5 billion ringgit. But more important is governance. To stop the leakages, billions pocketed by crooks, corrupt leaders, and if we have stopped that. Is it sufficient? Yes, but we need a bit more. Then we'll consider other measures. Now we are now looking at the measures without merely like electricity and diesel. We don't actually touch the base, because to me it's grossly unfair. I mean, yes, the country needs the money, partly through the corruption and the mismanagement of leaders in the past. I don't want to punish my people. They are not to be blamed. So we will have to introduce these reforms, but to preclude the common person so that they are not condemned in the process.
I think the next question to that is how Malaysia plans to improve the revenue side of running the government, the fiscal side, especially given that while the budget deficit itself has come down quite a bit since COVID-19, it's still well above the average of about 3%. How do you plan to improve or perhaps even try to introduce certain incremental improvements to the revenue side and actually collecting more revenues for the government?
Well, when I inherited the government, we had 1.5 trillion ringgit debt and 5.6% deficit. Now it's gone to 5, is going to be 3.6, and gradually down to 3. And borrowings, which was about 100 billion ringgit in the last 3 years, now have gone to 96, 93, 86, it's going to be 83. So it's quite substantial. Is it enough? No, not enough, because we have to spend more to improve the quality of life through education, public health, and infrastructure.
The ringgit, it's night and day when you compare it to, say, 6 months ago or the first half when it was at those levels not seen since the Asian financial crisis. Now we've gone from that to being inarguably and undoubtedly Southeast Asia's best performing currency. But it also brings its own set of challenges, especially because Malaysia is a significant exporter to the world. What is the better problem, sir? A strong ringgit or a weaker ringgit for Malaysia?
Well, the correct answer will be reasonable value. I mean, it is still undervalued. Yes, it will cause some concerns among the exporters. Not too bad, because it's still undervalued. But it has benefited immensely because it is a trading nation. We import a hell lot from overseas, and the world, and particularly Malaysia, will still depend largely on the dollar. But I am not too concerned about that, because it is still undervalued. At 410, people know used to be, at least 380. But it is wise that it goes gradually, and because that's beyond. There's no way that we should intervene and let the market forces play. And it reflects the confidence in our policies and the way we execute our reforms.
I want to move to another key project facing forward, which is the Singapore-Johor Special Economic Zone. It's something that the administration has started to put more resources into pushing. When can we expect finalization of this particular plan?
You see, the pragmatic policy that we adopt, and we have got, of course, we could consider relatively great or good relations with Singapore, even in the past. But I want to enhance that. And I think my colleagues from Sian Loong now and Lawrence, we have always, shared this kind of vision that we should set a good example how two great countries forge that sort of understanding will benefit one another, and within the ASEAN context too. So I am, of course, very excited about this initiative. Both Malaysia and Singapore giving all the support necessary. We have announced the financial zone, which actually brings a lot of Singapore professionals and fund managers. But the economic zone, virtually, actually, we have finalized all the terms. But we are waiting for the annual bilateral meeting between me and Prime Minister Lawrence, which is going to be first week of December. So to me, it's considered done. we have now opened up, although we have not officially announced or signed the agreement, but things are moving.
I decided to quit Intel. Then my peer managers asked me, "Oh, so which company are you going?" I said, "No, I'm not going anywhere."
Is this something that Malaysia is perhaps looking at beyond just the Singapore-Johor economic zone?
Yes, the Singapore Johor economic zone is more elaborate, of course, a sophisticated setup, which the both governments given so much emphasis. But between North Malaya and South Thailand, we have seen this sort of an advance, the commitment. We don't call it, this complex economic zone in the manner that we have it here in Johor, but the programs are there. New bridge, new highways as part of the program, and that's ongoing. Yeah, and new shopping complexes in both areas, and the decision to jointly develop tourism. You see, this to me, it's remarkable because it shows the preparedness to collaborate between countries.
Prime Minister, you brought up ASEAN a while ago, and I know that Malaysia will take over the chairmanship in 2025. And the evergreen question that the skeptics have with ASEAN is, can ASEAN act as a group while maintaining the principles of neutrality as well and non-interference? What are your thoughts as you prepare to take over the chairmanship and the more prominent leadership role, not just for Malaysia, but for this entire region?
No, with the ASEAN, we build and decide based on consensus. The more complex issue like Myanmar, we have at least the 5-point consensus. At the same time, we allow for countries to, on the low-level engagement with Myanmar, to express a position, and any formal decisions to be then cleared by the ASEAN leaders. And of course, I will abide to that and then consult our colleagues and move in that direction. The more contentious issue probably is the South China Sea. I want to preempt your question. Yes, our position in Malaysia is, of course, aggressively promoting this sort of relations with all countries. We have excellent relations. The United States is still huge investor, cumulatively the largest in Malaysia, and you see this new massive investments is still leading, and we have seen in the last 15 years China enhancing their trade and bilateral investments with Malaysia. We should use these to ensure that we continue to engage. Yes, we have differences. I have an issue when people just highlight the problem with our neighbor China. We have problems in all countries. We have small teething problems, border Thailand with Singapore. We could discuss water and FIR, but we don't discuss this as bitter foes. We're discussing as friends and brothers and one family. And I think we can resolve. Even we can't resolve, it's not going to cause any sort of a distrust and enmity and war. So similarly, that sort of position I will hope to achieve when it comes to more contentious issues like South China Sea. We should use bilateral mechanism, multilateral mechanism, and the ASEAN mechanism to engage, including with China.
Speaking of those Chinese investments, you've been keeping tabs perhaps of what's happening in the United States and perhaps the growing pressure from some politicians to perhaps go after Chinese companies that might be evading sanctions by investing in other countries, such as, say, Malaysia, for instance, and that they might actually go after some of those investments. Is that something that's perhaps a cause of concern for you as you try to maintain this neutrality and friendship with everybody that's becoming more and more difficult in this fragmented geopolitical world?
It's concerning because of the suspicion. But to the United States trade, etc., representatives coming to check, which is an open card. You tell us what's the problem. We engage. We don't want to be trapped into this sort of problem. You tell us. Or they say, there are some products that's being sold. Okay, you tell us. And then those things can be, to me, managed. But it cannot be based on suspicion and conjectures. must be based on solid facts.
What about Malaysia's efforts to become a part of the BRICS consortium itself, and perhaps also what some say is Malaysia's growing ties to Russia, which might not be seen as favorably by some of your Western allies and might also be seen as perhaps Malaysia softening their stance on Ukraine. How do you respond to some people who might have questions and perhaps are just scratching their heads over Malaysia becoming closer to this particular bloc, and particularly Russia?
Hi, I'm Kevin Chung, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer.
Dictate others. I mean, probably let us decide as Europe or China or Indonesia decide what is best for their countries, as long as it's not antagonistic towards us. In the case of BRICS, why I went to Vladivostok to meet Putin, because he's chairing BRICS this year, and I want to convey our interest to be part of BRICS and continue trade investments in areas which is not contentious. And I see no reason why we should not. Malaysia is a trading nation. We welcome investments from all over. I should not discriminate any other country. I've expressed my view on Ukraine. So do you therefore boycott them or disengage with them? I have an issue with my support for Palestinians in Gaza. But how is it that they have this sort of contradiction and double standards when it comes to Ukraine and Gaza? There's an issue, and I expressed publicly. But having said that, our relations continue with the United States. I mean, it's a traditional ally in many ways. But I don't see the reason why people should question why we should befriend and continue engagement with Russia.
I have to ask you though, Prime Minister, because you are one of the few world leaders that has publicly stood in support of what's happening in Palestine and the war in Gaza. Of course, this also goes against the grain of some of your stronger Western allies, like the United States. Can you talk to us about why this is important for you?
You see, JP, why do we talk about democracy and human rights and dignity of man and woman? Why do we condone atrocities and genocide happening every day? So I am just voicing out what I think is the concerns of many Malaysians and appealing for peaceful resolution and stopping the killing and the indiscriminate bombings, which unfortunately is going on a daily basis. Can you imagine any country in the world, any country region in the world can continue with impunity the menace being done? No. Now, why the exception? Why this country is giving this carte blanche to do whatever they like? Yeah, you can hear some statements, but no real attempt to stop this. I mean, that's all that I have to voice out, because I think I'm passionate about this. Can be anywhere where they say some things happen. Even Ukraine, I made it quite clear that I'm not in favor. I'm in fact opposed the invasion of Ukraine. But Ukraine becomes a big issue in the States and in Europe. They can spend billions to support, but here you support billions to kill. So this hypocrisy must end.
Dr. Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister of Malaysia, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Yavi.